Hello and welcome to Slava class. Why was I calling it Slava class? Slava class comment response video. And thank you for tuning in and watching. So, this is going to be interesting because this one did generate a lot of comments. And so if I can get this done in 20 minutes, it's going to be hard work for me. Sigil 90, very symbolic of Soviet design when you festoon every square inch of a ship with weapons or sensors. Fight for Global First Amendment sounds like the US in World War II and the early Cold War and the Royal Navy of the Age of Sail. Mr. CZ, oh, that's what you're supposed to think. Pretty much, I would say the Slava class actually has more room than it looks like. It looks like there's a lot of weapons, but it also looks like there's a lot of space when you think about it. Now, of course, because of what had recently happened when this video came out, the losing of a very specific one member of the class in combat off Ukraine, this video kind of generated a fair number of comments along that line. So I'm going to go through those comments, of course, in my own way, but remember to draw differences between what I say and what the commentator says. What the comment says and what I say, because occasionally in comment response videos I get comments going, you shouldn't have said that, and I'm going, I was reading the comment out. My response to the comment is what you should be judging me by, not the comment which I read out for you to be able to hear. Hopefully properly, and not too fast. I do get that because sometimes people go, you read the comment too fast. I try not to. Nice. Yeah, considering that that one of the Slava class cruisers got sunk and was arguably in worse shape than Hood was in 1941. Frankly, the Russians had no excuse for letting the Moskva get into the condition she was in when she got sunk. They should have known better, as they can look back at the Iron's misfortunes with the Hood and the final decade of Hood's life and avoided it. The Royal Navy has a reasonable excuse for the mess they found themselves with Hood going into World War II. As they don't get the flagship role battlecruiser, they had planned to go to G3s, so they have to use Hood for the flagship role and run her ragged. But every time they attempt to fix the mess they created, bad luck rears its ugly head in the form of the Spanish Civil War, the breakout of World War II, or Bismarck, meaning they never get the luxury to fix the mess. Okay, there's a lot to unpack in that one. And nice to go for one, I do realise Hood is a specific favourite of yours. But let's put it this way. So, reports of Hood's deplorable status when she goes down are overly anticipated and argued. She has been refitted, she has been repaired, she has been upgraded. Just not had the full modernisation a la Renown and Warspite, because it hadn't been her turn before war began. And that is an issue. And yes, you can point to many scenarios. I myself focus in on the British government. But the argument was they were modernising as quickly as they could. They weren't. There were more yards available, and especially if you can consider paid to close down in the early 1930s as a national cost-saving measure, because then they wouldn't get to build so many ships if they shut down the yards. They do this in the early 1930s, just after they've decided the 10-year rule no longer matters and that there could actually be war by 1942. They go around paying for some yards to close up. Yeah, we have smart governments in the UK. No, never let the accent fool you. But leaving that to one side, Hood was in as good a condition as you'd expect for a 20-year-old ship. When she goes down, yes, she could have been maintained, she could have had a bigger upgrade. Yes, that would have been useful, but... And she's used as a flagship role mainly because she's the largest ship in the fleet and therefore she looks coolest when she turns up. It's kind of like the reason these ships were used as flagship. Moskva was used as a flagship role because it was the largest ship you had in the area, so therefore it looks coolest as your flagship. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the ship which should be your flagship. And pointedly, every time she visited places like the Mediterranean, etc., she wasn't used as the flagship. There was usually Warspite or something else wandering around. because there were better options for the CNC's flagship. And even Hood is never really the flagship of the Royal Navy. She's used as the poster ship for the Royal Navy because she's big and she's sent around the world and she sails around the world and she's useful for the Empire cruise in 1924 and all those things. But I would say the big issue with her is the perception of people that she is the flagship of the Royal Navy, that she's the status ship that she is. Because she is used as a global reaching ship. Because also, again, Nelson and Rodney have the issue that they don't quite look right in the role. This, of course, was Moskva. Now, for the Russians to let Moskva get in the position, in the condition she is, that is equally an issue. And that's equally a government issue. But in the UK scenario, it's because the government thinks it has more time, always thinks it has more time, and always thinks it can do things from a most cost-efficient perspective. From the Russian scenario, it seems to have been, the lesson so far we seem to have learnt is that Russia's logistics, infrastructure, and maintenance systems are not what they need to be to sustain their status in the world and sustain the kind of operations when they're in a peer-on-peer conflict. They have things which make them look good on paper. The trouble is, they don't have the cardboard behind the paper to make it stand up. Now, the really interesting thing is how good you think the cardboard behind the NATO paper is. And the really interesting thing after that is whether you think the cardboard might get better quality and might actually get thick enough to hold it up as a result of this current war for Russia. So far, I haven't seen suggestions that that is a likely outcome. But it is still a possibility as there is some work being done. And you should always be careful in assuming that what happens today is going to be repeated tomorrow. What is Moo? Okay, you've done a beautifully large comment. And you just sort of, the first comment was, I'm just commenting here because I'm going to leave my thoughts later when I'm back in the office. So I say I've got a few. And my response was, and I'm just commenting now, I knew you were going to have some, because I do know how you like the Soviet vessels and the Russian history. Then remember, the key thing is comments drive the logarithm. Got to get that view interaction in early to get the video into people's recommendations. Yes, comments are really useful, so I will say that. If you want to help a video out, liking it and commenting is the biggest way you can support. If you are someone you're watching, a content creator, whether a historian like me or whatever they're kind, and you want to really help them, like and comment on a video. It really does help. That's how the logarithm seems to work. Liking, commenting, and sharing. If you can share on social media, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, those things are big impacts. And Facebook's logarithm seems to take more and more of that into account. It's like they also take into account how many subscribers you have versus how many followers you have, etc., and those sort of things. Now, what is Moo? You have done a beautifully long comment, and I am never going to get this done in 20 minutes thanks to this comment. I'm just going to say that now. As far as I can tell, there's no evidence that the Slavs were conceptualized as a spare to the Kirovs. As best as I can figure out, they were backups to the PR-1165, the initial nuclear Kinder replacement, which was cancelled in 1971, just before the Slava project starts. The Kirovs were a messy design lineage, and there's a story for another day, and we will get into that. But the Slavs were supposed to be a punchy anti-ship Kinder replacement, and the Kirovs were, for much of their development, ostensibly a nuclear large anti-submarine warfare ship. When they were being designed in the 1970s, their equipment was cutting edge. P500 was just set to enter service in 1975, S300 F was in development, and AK-130 was the middle of having a design meltdown because the VMF really wanted 80 rounds a minute out of a single mount. Regarding calling them the Kara 2, the Karas are more realistic than the Cresta 3, and the Slavs represent a radical departure from the role and armament of the ships. Kara has a 96 medium-range SAMs, while Slava has 64 long-range SAMs. Kara has 8 anti-submarine missiles with a secondary anti-ship mode and pretty short range. Slava has 16 very big, very fast, long-range anti-ship missiles. They're very different types of ship and share basically nothing other than the Ossa M and hull design lineage. Okay, so I'm going to deal with your comment as it comes. As a spare to the Kirovs, I've discussed this before. This is what I've got from my own discussions with, mainly with my father when he wandered around, but also with Russian naval architects I've met when they've come to the UK, and naval officers who I've had the joy of talking to at King's, etc., and various other things. So that's the sense I've got, and to an extent from reading between the lines of some books. So I think I said this in the video myself when I said this is my impression based on what I have discussed and what I have learnt, in that it was an insurance policy to an extent for the Kirovs in terms of, how do I put this politely? And I don't mean politely to you, Watson, I mean politely to the Russians. In terms of, they needed a large status escort vessel. And they didn't really care so much what it did, as long as it worked at what it did and looked good. Because of presence around the world, because their carrier program wasn't developing quickly enough, and they needed something that they could send places like the Black Sea, but also send places like the Mediterranean, and if necessary the Indian Ocean, etc., and look good in the Pacific, and look good and look gorgeous and pretty, and basically be sharp and look powerful and menacing from a presence perspective. This is the other thing which drives their quite obvious, massive, large capability in terms of anti-ship capability, and is where they sort of represent a development from the Karas. As you say, yes, they have hull design lineage, they have all sorts of lineage which factors into them, into their evolution, into their creation. And the thing is, what are the role they're built for? I would not describe the Karas versus the Slavas as being built to be the flagship, presence ship role. As you point out, they have the medium range SAMs. They're part of a task group. They are a very crucial task group vessel in terms of the Kara, whereas the Slava is the task group. Now, I will point out, before we go into too much, he does finish with the line, overall solid video though. So, what I laugh about Wadismu is he is another academic, and it's one of those great things. We will critique each other to the nth degree, and go through, critique each other line by line, and then finish off with, overall, it was a good essay. People looking at it, that man points, it must have been a terrible video. No, that's how picky we get when we are critiquing each other. Which is why things like peer review matter, and why saying something's peer reviewed when it's done properly for a journal which actually does peer review rather than just publishing it, it has so much weight. Because it has been picked over to the nth degree. So what you're reading is as factually accurate as the reviewers and the author can make it. Now, this doesn't mean the reviewers and the authors always agree. And often you will still get notes sometimes in journals, but it used to be more common of, the reviewers disagree with this statement, however the evidence of the author has backed it up, so it has been left in. The joy about my video production process is the reviewer is me before it goes out. And there are some people who very kindly volunteered, and I keep meaning to use them more than I do, and to get round to using all of them, because I had about a dozen people volunteer very kindly to review videos, and so far I've used about 5 of them, mainly for larger videos. But the thing is, it's having a video finished in time before it has to go through the publication cycle on YouTube that I actually have time to send it to a reviewer to review, and then re-record, and then put it through the publication cycle if I wanted. And so far usually I'm being picky enough that they don't get done in time enough for that. Oh, so S300 things. S300F is a major and radical improvement over the M11 SAN3, being long-range, high-volume SAM system which can track 12 and engage 6 targets simultaneously through the engagement radar. The 3R41 Volna top down. Compared to the tracking engagement 2 targets, one each per headlights engagement radar, S300F is so remarkably better than the M11 that it's literally a different role of missile. It's like saying the SM2ER is only a mild improvement over Tartar. True in theory, However, the actual engagement system behind it and the system managing it was sufficiently complicated and sufficiently, labor intensive that I worry about its true capabilities. Because in theory, you could argue it's their progression down a line which could create some sort of Aegis equivalent. Please note, I'm saying a progression down the line towards an Aegis equivalent. I'm not saying Aegis equivalent. Before What Is Moo picks me up on this one. However, I don't think it's as good as that system. And I'd say some of the experiences in terms of their operational experience of the system have shown that the maintenance requirements, etc., of it have often mitigated against it being performing as well as it could do. And I'm not talking about Ukraine, I'm talking about other scenarios. Now, also to be clear, 64 S300F is quite a formidable surface combatant. That's 64 missiles comparable to SM-1ER with its range of 50 to 75 kilometers band. This compares with the US Instructions Mark 10 Mod 7 GMLS, which carried 60 to SM-1ER or ASRAC, except it's a VLS and has far more advanced radar system. Meanwhile, the M11 Sturm is broadly comparable to the Tartar SM-1 medium range, MR. The ER is extended range in the 30-50 kilometer range band, and installation on the Kara class large ASW ships is most comparable to the California class CGN's 2 Mark 13 GMLS guided missile launch systems. Yeah, broadly speaking. It's also really important not to lump all SAMs together. It's like lumping 5-inch 38 or 4.5-inch or 40mm Bofors, 40mm pom-pom, 50 cal Vickers, 1.1-inch and 20mm Oerlikon together. To butcher the analogy more, the Karas are like a big destroyer without a dual-purpose main battery, but with a ton of 40mm guns for corrosive protection, while the Slavs are more like a well-rounded light cruiser with a solid dual-purpose secondary battery, but light on the 40mm. That is a really, really butchered analogy. Really butchered analogy. I can see analogy where I can see where you're going for on that one, but it's a really butchered analogy. And I would say the Karas are a task force vessel, whereas the Slavas are built on sort of the similar hull, are something else. They are the command ship, the picket ship, the solar mover. I would honestly, if I was going to say it, I would say the Karas are more like a Dido or an Atlanta. They are an amazing ship, but they're an amazing ship in their role. And if you've got to remember, on the same hull as produced the Didos also produced the Arafusas. And the Arafusas are one of my favourite cruiser types of World War II, and the Aire La Argentina. On the same hull. On the same evolution. So yeah, I would say that's what you're sort of... you're dealing... This is more like the Argentina to the Kara's Dido. How's that for analogy? i.e. an AA cruiser versus a flagship multi-purpose light cruiser. AA light cruiser versus a... yeah, that's what I'd sort of go for them. In regards to the S300F on the Karas, there were issues with integrating the anti-submarine warfare missile control system with new radars, and it was determined to be uneconomical to refit them other than the Azov as a test ship, and not even both ends of her. Yeah, there were all sorts of issues with that one. The Ossa M is really just a piece of hot trash. They knew it, and it's why the SAN-9 Kinzhal Naval Tour was pushed for so aggressively. It's so common mainly because it was the only option the Soviet had for point defense for a long time, due to technical problems with development of the SAN-9. You can say it again, but it's not really a hot piece of trash. It was viable when it first entered service. Unfortunately, it ended service a long time ago, and capability just hasn't had room for upgrade. And basically, to upgrade it, you need to start again. P500 was pretty solid when the ship was designed in the early 70s. It's basically a product improved version of the P6 P35 missile, which was in no small part because the Navy refused any bigger of a missile. There are plans to lay Moscow down in December 1974, but they ran into delays with the P500, S300F, and the AK-130 that pushed them to 1976. But in 1974, P500 was a very solid weapon and the new hotness. They just took a very long time to build on top of delays. True. But it's also, how do I put this? It is a very stable design to pick on from that. And most of their designs, whilst you are right, they are newer systems, they are stable versions. And they have been stabilized a lot. It is a very conservative build in some regards. Slava sinking. Larry Bond and the guys over the Admiralty Treasury did a great video on the sinking. IMO Moskva Slava was known for great seakeeping, so it's deeply unlikely she sank due to weather. Agreed. Note as well that Moskva never really got any upgrades because she was really ragged. I've never seen any description of issues from radars stepping on comms or vice versa, but the leaked damage report from the start of the war indicated that basically none of her SAMs worked, only the long-range high-volume air search radar, which was used to provide early warning coverage for other task groups. Yes, but on the radars interfering with comms issue, I heard about that in... it was a paper a few years ago at a conference on Type 42s in the Falklands War. And it was brought up for the author of the paper, who was... Oh, I'm trying to remember his name. It wasn't on the Chatham House rules, so I can talk about it. He was a naval architect. Where was he from? I think he was from Poland. I think. Oh, good Lord, Alex. Remember. I will probably remember this when I'm in Australia and this video goes live. I will remember this. I remember the author. That's how my brain does it sometimes. But no, he talked about a paper and he was comparing types and he brought it up. And he was comparing the Type 42s and the issues in the Falklands War with these ships and said they had these issues. And he said it was actually quite common with a lot of with some of the Soviet ships in the area. Oh, good Lord, I'd love to remember his name. I will have to look up and see if it was ever published online, if it was ever published in English online. But it was a very interesting paper, and my theory basically is a Polish naval architect who had retrieved training in that era will probably have had friends who were involved in various things and probably should know. And it was a paper at a conference. Oh, Alex, remember. Sorry. Okay, Naval Analysis. It would be cool to him to do a video on Tiburon class cruisers now being instrumental. They are my favourite cruisers and are pretty revolutionary and iconic, considering they're the first with Aegis combat systems and SPY radars. And maybe Arleigh Burke class, but great video and info as always. Thank you. And that's on that came out on the Tico video came out on Saturday, the 31st of December. Jerry, are you going to do the Udaloy and Submarine class as well? No, not doing destroyers this year. Might well do more Soviet ships next year as part of Euro technology, as they take a slightly different approach. May pick up other navies entirely. I'll see how many people find these of interest. I think I'm going to do different navies this year at Christmas, but I think I will be doing destroyers, because I'm planning a year of destroyer like I did Euro cruisers at some point. It's working out whether it's going to be 2024 or 2026. So, comment below if you'd like the year of destroyers to be 2024, or you would like the year of... what's the other option? I think it was going to be the year of aircraft carriers, being 2024. It's going to go through every aircraft carriers like I did the cruisers. I feel real. Gotta say, it's a glorious name at least. For those that don't get a wordplay, Slava is Russian for glory. Jack Ray, thank you for an informative and entertaining video. The Soviet and Russian videos have added entertainment due to the name pronunciation fun. The missile launchers that are on the sides remind me of the USS Vesuvius in 1888 with its locked-in-place dynamite guns that also sloped an angle. Ooh, those were cool weapons. My choices for second class or spare ship types in no particular order. York, Exeter, the cut price counties. Ugh. Everyone always brings that up. Crown Colony class cruisers, cut price down class, yes. USS Wasp, yes. See, that's CV7. Weapon class destroyers. Yeah, sadly enough. H1, even though they would be top range battleship for almost any other navy that well, for the British I would argue the R's are a deliberate cutback, spare type ship designed for numbers. Not to be the best battleship Britain could build at the time. Dan Rim, I did a calculation a while ago that 8R class would have nearly replaced the 12-inch armed battleships in the home fleet, but in doing so, were supposed to work with the slower 13.5-inch ships, so giving them speed wasn't really necessary. The big question is, what would the RN have procured after the R class if there hadn't been some angst in the Balkans in the summer of 1914? That is an interesting question, because what things could have evolved if war... Let's put it this way, if World War I doesn't start till 1916, 1918... the British are producing the next super dreadnoughts after the Queen's. Queen Elizabeth's. So the R's are all in service. The Queen's are in service. What comes next? And remember, the Americans are announced they're heading for 16-inch at that point, so the British are going to be thinking, next step up. Are they going to go for a 12, 15-inch gun ship? Are they going to go for something even sexier? Who knows? Dutchman, I've just been watching on YouTube Richard Weinmark, Dan Andrews, Garrett Merrill full war drama movie, The Frogman, colorized with great movie, great ships. Cool. I'll have to look it up at some point. Henge, it's clear the Slavas are second rate when they don't get a fan tender to make sure their flags look good on photos. I did follow the link. That's a sad time. The Queen Anne Mansion, I guess, is equivalent is the Moscow GUM store. Yeah, it is. Look, you're getting what I'm talking about. Let's be honest, that superstructure on the Slavas does look a bit like the Queen Anne mansions that the Royal Navy like to put on their capital ships in the run-up to World War II. I think there obviously was a naval architect who was a bit of a historian who liked the King George V's. Bengaron, I have a question on something. Russian anti-ship missiles such as sandbag ship rocks. I've heard some claim that they are some form of explosively formed penetration or heat equivalent. If the Cold War went hot but not nuclear, what do you think is the character of these missiles chance of these missiles actually sinking the hour when it's fresh, while it was in its refresh service period? Depends on how many hit and where they hit. If one missile hits an unarmed area, it would require dry dock probably, but not sink it, because I think it might actually go through. If hit by 3 or 4 and penetrating critical areas, engine rooms, magazine deck, it could be sunk. That probably sounds like a wishy-washy answer, but it's an honest one. Even a single hit that makes it to the magazine could take out the ship, depending upon the speed that magazine is neutralized. Bangaron, let me clarify a little more. How much credibility do the claims of the hybrid EFP-HE have in terms of actually punching the belt? As these are supposedly ski skimmers, and my mind is thinking if it could pierce an hour on a belt, surely rip through and out the back of a Tico class without arming. Either that or you have an explosive outside the belt doing little structure. Seems like diametrically opposed objectives. Now, I'll get into my response to this at some point, but I'm going to read through the response of other people's. Kalmagosberg. To Bengaron, they are not that close sea skimmers to hit the belt, but something that is 3 to 7 tons at launch and can 2 Mach 3 is in relatively low altitude, hitting over the belt, that would hurt. Also, Western anti-ship missiles, some perform a pop-up maneuver in terminal phase, effectively diving on target. I don't know whether ex-Soviet missiles had this option. From Ben Gergren, I was under the impression that the Granite system was meant to fly most of the way to the target in a low, high-low profile, where they stayed at approximately 25 meters during the launch to keep the initial thermal plumes of their boosters from being seen over the horizon, then travel most of the way at mid-height, effective cruise, then near the target, one missile stays high to feed terrain radar on the waveforms they're closing in with, so the majority of missiles were below 5 meters, the idea being that the low missiles were both low and fast enough to not allow the Phalanx time to track and engage, a period of less than 2 seconds for the Phalanx's entire engagement profile. Of course, that assumes you take how Russia claimed the missiles worked. And let's be honest, that's a lot of integration, a lot of working to go for that to all be effective. Generic X. Mind the problem with heat warheads was that they were good for penetration but not destruction. A high explosive anti-tank works by creating a penetrator from the shaping and compression of metal via the energy of exploding chemical around it. The only damage a heat does is via a penetrator, because the penetrator itself is just hot metal. Any damage done is only done by the metal flying, and it only harms as far as the metal can fly. Heat is great for killing tanks because tanks are cramped things with little to no internal compartmentalization. If a penetration happens, that penetrator is going to harm something important because there's basically something important no matter where you hit. Battleships, on the other hand, are not tanks. They were designed specifically to contain damage from penetration by armor-piercing high-explosive ammunition. Shells that go through armor and then detonate are explosive behind the armor. Battleships have compartments that are specifically designed to keep damage isolated. Heat penetrators thus shouldn't be particularly lethal to battleships because the heat will basically just make a hole and not much else. Compartments penetrated will be messes for sure, but depending on where the penetrator is going, it'll be hitting void spaces, armored bulkheads, and more than that, will expend the penetrator's energy. For a ship designed to not just get holes in it, but to contain the effects of 80 pounds of high explosive at sending 2,000 pounds of steel splinters at high speeds, the holes made by heat are not quite terrifying as they would be to most other ships in the 1980s. What the heat will do of consequence is send the energy of several hundred kilograms of detonating high explosive into the ship structure when it hits the outside armor. This will certainly do damage that will require repair after the fact. On the belt, Barbette, or any other thickness parts of the armor scheme, the effect should be relatively minor. A hit on the superstructure, however, will be horrific as the shockwave blows weld, shatters plates, and more. However, that is not the Citadel of the ship, so the ship will likely not sink or be immobilized. By far the biggest problem the Iowa class would have had if they'd been hit by one or more larger Soviet anti-ship missiles is that there was limited infrastructure to replace main guns or armor damaged by the hits. The USA had not rolled battleship armor or made 6-inch gun breaches since the 1940s, so if any of these things were damaged, the ship would basically have to make do without equal or better parts for the foreseeable future. In theory, 12-inch steel plate could be sourced, but it would have taken a lot of time to roll and would not likely match the original productive quality. There also was a tiny reserve of gun breaches, but if an hour had one or more turrets penetrated, odds are the reserve would be used up. So long and short, battleships are arguably the one ship the Soviet missiles would not be doing much lethal harm to. Their very design features that were to keep enemy 16-inch shells from sinking in US Iowa in 1942 really were excellent for stopping a Soviet shipwreck from shipwrecking US Iowa enough to make it a shipwreck. Hits from such weapons would probably be a mission kill for the Iowa, forcing repair, but unlikely to sink her short of supreme bad luck, provoking magazine detonation. Which is pretty much what I said at the beginning. The magazine detonation is going to kill the ship. Anyway, with the end phase 5 meters high, the devil is in the Egypt. So the somewhat forward-looking altimetric radar picks up the highest point and around the flight path, the 1 or more kilometers ahead. So except in very calm conditions, actual altitude is actually more. Generic per heat warhead versus battleship. See German heat charge experiment in French battleship Jean Bart. General President, mind the Germans used a 3,600 kilogram, nearly double the Soviet warheads, and optimally placed the charges. The results were impressive, but the tests were limited in their breadth and depth, limiting the usefulness of them for discussion of the US Iowa. The ex-Jean Bart in 1943 was not exactly in the best shape, nor representative of Iowa's level of internal protection. A lot was learned about improving protection schemes between 1911 and 1941, and the USA especially was fond of underwater protection and internal flooding regulation. I'm not saying Iowas could shrug off shipwrecks without care, but all of the US Navy ships in 1985, the Iowa class was one most likely to take a hit and make it home to complain about it. Just for a good educated guess, compare the RPG-7 with the World War II Panzerfaust, picking similar weight and diameter variants, and see how 20 years something between them has affected penetration. Also add a multi-ton steel missile body able to withstand Mach 3, and maybe some unused fuel to cause damage. If you want to say even a penetrating belt hit from a P500 71000 won't sink an hour automatically, I agree, but as Dr. Clarke said, a lucky hit can knock out some critical systems, or even more, penetrate into an ammo area. I would say a P700 hit is a way more serious emotional event than an 18-inch shell hit. General Person X, pretty much all I said. I can take the hits better than anyone, but they wouldn't be shrugging them off either. And this is basically what I tried to say, but without as much detail in my own comment. The Iowas, if they're hit by these large missiles, it is going to be a significant event. If they're hit on the armour, if it stays outside the armour, the vibrations, etc. are probably going to cause issues for the engines. If it hits the superstructure, if it hits the unarmoured parts of the vessel, there is going to be major destruction. If it manages, and I think the worst place for it to hit, the absolute worst place for it would be an edge of a turret. And let me explain that. Because if it does hit with the shape charge and the fuel and the way the explosive falls in, if it does damage internally to the turret because of that, displaces the turret, maybe you shifts it around, that's going to have an effect on the ship's balance, but that could also disrupt and cause troubles right down to the magazine. It shouldn't do, because of the armour, etc., but that's also the scenario which is where it's most possible that it could do. It's one of those things. Armour is great, and being the level of subdivision of battleship is amazing. But their main advantage versus those missiles was that they were the missiles weren't designed with them in mind. If they had been, there could have been some serious issues. Gustav Ellison, 0112. I can't quite understand what's going on. Something which is automatically an as-run, something which is automatically an also-run, and also-run. Did some part of that sentence get cut off during editing? Something which is automatically an also-run is from Sorry Confused, and sometimes the editing does seem to do weird things when I stitch things back together. I have no idea why, and sometimes I don't notice it. Which is really annoying. Tom Vanderbilt, there's one thing I know. If the Russians ever decide to name a ship after Roslansky, it's probably going to be near unsinkable. Solid Russian admiral for a solid ship, but no. I'll hope I'll still live to see the data. I would love them to have named something Roslansky, but they haven't. They've got a carrier called Kuznetsov instead. Kuznetsov's a good admiral, but, you know, they haven't got anything. They've got a frigate named Gorshkov. They could do with a frigate named Roslansky. OGS Scarlet, 3T, but they'll need to keep it supplied in binoculars, because I'm sure it'll keep losing them. Just wanted to say, it might be the spare, but considering it rocked up off our coast here in Australia, it could give the majority of our service fleet a run for its money and probably win. I don't doubt the men and women who serve on their own ships, they're good and fine sailors. However, I do doubt the quality and combat capability of the ships in use currently. I can understand that, but honestly, in the nicest way, it would be a Collins-class submarine that would have seen for it. And I'm fairly sure when it rocked up off the coast, there was a Collins-class not far away from it, in case any issues happened. Rather like Britain for years, there has relied on its submarines for its anti-ship capability, and now they're sort of going, we might need to rebuild this capability. Yeah, we might, because what we're relying on submarines is okay as long as you have enough submarines. We don't have enough submarines. Oh. Vision. The Slava class versus Kirov class reminds me of the British Rail's decision in the 1970s to develop the Intercity 125 HST as an interim measure until the development of the Advanced Passenger Train came to fruition. The HST, while benefiting from research accomplished by the APT project, was primarily off-the-shelf technology. While several technologies in the APT prototypes were in a work in progress, including tilting system, if the APT system succeeded, it would render the HST an also-run train. One that was as a diesel train could still provide very useful service on electrified main lines. Perhaps this is the difference between the Slava class. The HST could do something the APT could not while it was rapidly developed and placed in service during the 1970s, generally upgrading the BR's intercity services, unlike the long build times of the Slava class cruisers that provide little new ability. The closest parallel I can think of as a spare air also round weapons platform is the heavy strategic bomber consolidated B-32 Dominator, which was fallback to the Boeing B-29. After development issues, only 118 were built for the Army Air Corps, and they briefly saw service in World War II, with the last Allied aircrew casualties of World War II taking place when a B-32 was shot up by Japanese fighters over Tokyo, heavy damage bomber making it back to base. They were quickly scrapped after the war. Tim Anderson, Kitty Hawks. It's my opinion they would fall back if the Enterprise didn't work. That's an interesting position, and I could consider that. Matters Effect. That's a generous way to say it. I consider Admiral Kuznetsov as 1/3 of a carrier at most, given her design capabilities in current state of disrepair. I tend to try and be generous and polite. Steve Clarke, Alex, so if these ships are, as you state, an extension of the earlier Kara class, this fits with the Soviet ideas of product improvement, so Cresta, then Cresta 2. I get the point that they seem to be a non-nuclear backup, but a true non-nuclear backup to the battlecruiser should surely logically have had a similar displacement ship they were backup for. So 20,000 plus tons, not 12,000 tons of Slava as improved on carrier. That would require having the yard space to build more ships of that size and wouldn't be a backup spare so much as a competitor. And whilst in terms of submarines, Gorshkov wouldn't have that bothered, for surf ships, well, it would have caused more issues. So there are limitations what you do, hence the Slavas. So, Steve Clarke, so not so much like the British Type 42 as a budget backup for the much larger Type 82. Much like as the British, yeah, it's to extent it's that. Fight for a Global First Amendment. Question to Clarke. Could you please do a series on the RSN, USN, Soviet, and best of the rest, the lesson learned and implementation of the Falklands War, please? At some point, I will probably do that. XR Kun, wasn't the whole USR Navy the third air? The strategic nuclear force were king, the army was the air force was despair, and the Navy dangled somewhere down below, especially in the 80s, with the festering wound of the war in Afghanistan going on. They may have had strategic nuclear submarines, but they were to give they were more to give the Yanks something extra to worry about and to hit back after the decapitation strike. The whole scenario of the Soviet Navy, as I got into with the Gorshkov series of videos, and I'm going to get on later with actually a video about Gorshkov and the era technology, is an interesting scenario because the Soviet Navy wanders around its position. It really does. Captain Novice, the missile cruiser Moskva, flagship and pride of the Black Sea Fleet. Ukraine stands no chance of Moscow ready to pound their coastal fences into rubble. If its systems had actually worked, maybe. And being kept up to date. Dave Nelson, I keep having flashbacks to many games of Harpoon. Ooh, a good game. And, Baldur's Go, this has been a fascinating video. Thanks for putting this together. It took me about 4 days to get through it. Goodness gracious me, it was only an hour long. In terms of spares, I don't know that I agree. These feel more like second rates than spares, which I think you alluded to a couple of times. If your 74 is a workhorse, and the first rate ship is a spare, don't I suppose the 90 gun ship is a spare? I don't agree with that, though. I think a true spare is a ship that is not really needed and subpar and created to fill the space rather than need. The Ardent and Trepidant classes of 64 guns come to mind. But I'm not sure I even like that, because some of those 64s got up to definite shenanigans. You would be hard-pressed to find fightier ships than Agamemnon and Monmouth, for example, on the other hand. Maybe some of the later 50-gun ships or the later Sumners. I would say there's an interesting point with listing a second rate rather than a spare. And I think if you're talking about age of sail Navy terms, I would definitely categorize it, put in the second rate strategy. But there again, second rates were built for specific reasons. You build a second rate rather than a first rate because you needed a vessel of those capability range that a second rate provides. The second rates weren't really liked as much as first rates, because the only advantage of them really over a third rate was the extra deck. They didn't really have any length or anything, etc. In fact, it's often said that a second rate is a cut down first rate, because a first rate is as long as a third rate, whereas a second rate is often slightly shorter. So second rate had other issues. So second rates weren't really spares. But basically, imagine if the Royal Navy, the Age of Sail doesn't really have that concept, because no one ever really sort of does the scenario of building a spare ship. But you have to look at sort of more recent, more sort of standard construction. Lord Nelson class versus HMS Dreadnought. You can argue their continued construction when you've already decided on the Dreadnought is producing a spare. It's a case of, if this one doesn't work out, we've still got these. We know they're going to be out of date the moment out of date before they're even launched. In fact, they are out of date the moment when they're launched, because that's already come out. But we're still building them just in case that doesn't work. Mrs. EZ, hello. In the aftermath of Moscow sinking, every source said strange this ship had 3 times 360 anti-air missile defense. Scientific crew, it didn't. Just from the deck layout, it can't and never had. And that's the quoted layer arcs of a Kirov class, which has additional 2 close-in weapon systems mounted behind a helicopter hangar. Slavs had 1 360, Grumble, 2 times 270, 1 Ossa, and 6 close-in weapon systems defense, at best because that helicopter hangar dominates the stern. There were destroyers at Jutland with more open deck space than the Slava class. The reality is, more likely Slavas had 2 times 360 at sea level, with the Ossa only used to cover close-in weapon systems blind area at stern. That's a class design limitation. The recklessness of Moscow's command first becomes apparent when the ships repeatedly shelled Odessa beachfront, meaning she was often in gun range of a hostile coast. It's takes a briggy, stupid hero, I think we'll go with, to think that level of risk is worth it. Moscow's second major problem is her sister ship is sat mostly complete with blueprints on the Inuit River in enemy hands. The third ring of disaster around Moscow is the radar is only partially active due to comms jamming. The close-in weapon system wasn't in full service despite a refit in 2020, just refresh paint, and the Yasser is not at readiness because only senior officers are trusted to fire it. It means the defense ring is effectively 1 to 2 working AK-130 Gatling guns. Moscow was a sitting duck with 1980s damage control system and manual backups probably designed in the 1940s. I would say most of the Russian manual damage control systems were designed in the 1930s, but yeah, you're not far off. I'd also say the damage control system is mostly a system which was developed in the 1960s. It's been evolved and developed from that point, but yeah, it's still the backbone is the 1960s system. From the Russian ships I have had the fortunate to have a closer look experience to have a closer look at. 2 subsonic missiles, expertly aimed by people with 100% knowledge of the major systems of the target, penetrate what's left of the close-in weapons ring at sea level, and set fire to the engine room damage control. Her engineering crew, probably in desperation as all the automatics failed and their damage control officers are dead, a fully flooded engine room fire because before it set off the volatile missile fuel just a deck above, and blew the British crew to Odessa. This amount of water deep in the ship, with little counter-flooding control or available power to pumps, is most likely narrative of what sank her in an observably fat calm. The loss of the crew can be laid at the flotilla command level. The loss of the ship lies more with the Ministry, who delayed writing updated fleet damage control standards between 1993 and 2018, and Putin for using this ship in a war with the country who originally built the Slava-class cruisers, just like Stalin's Soviet vessels built by interwar Germany. To be fair, most of the vessels built by interwar Germany did not get used by Stalin because they weren't delivered in condition to be used. They were supposed to be finished off in Soviet yards, and they never did. Issues happen. The Italian designs worked quite well, and most of the ships built by the most of the ships built for the Tsarist government prior to World War I were very useful to the Imperial German Navy, to the Kaiserlich Marine. It happens, but no, she is. That's an interesting summary, and I would say. And just to clarify on the ships I've had the closer look at of Soviet origins, they weren't Soviet. Or rather, they weren't Russian ships. They're ones which are now operating under different flags. Or were. Some of them, I think one was no longer service. This is the great fun of having first gone on a ship with my father when I was 5 years old. Might have actually... Was it 5? Yeah, about 5 years old. Might have been just before my 5th birthday. And I went around with ships a lot with him over the next 11 years. And then, of course, he wasn't around for about 10 years. But during that time, I grew up and became very interested in naval history, met a lot of members of the Royal Navy and various other things, and started getting invited to go around ships by myself, which was fun. And then when he came back into my life, he was even older than he was and still getting invited to go on naval ships, so I went with him again. So I've been on a lot of ships in my time. I still do go on occasionally when I'm invited, and love to have a look around them. So, I would say the big lesson of all these ships is they are only as good as the maintenance and upkeep. When you're looking at any ship, it doesn't matter of any period, what matters as much is the infrastructure behind it. What matters as much is the maritime industry behind it. What matters as much is the bureaucracy behind it, and the willingness of that bureaucracy to do its job and actually invest in these things. If they do, great. If they don't, you're up the creek without a paddle. So that is the problem. The modern Russian Navy had a long period of little to no investment, little to no actual proper attention, and little to no actual, therefore, sustained maintenance. There are some ships which have done better than this, and this is the interesting point when we're talking about things like the Pito Veliki, which there is still some discussion as whether or not it's going to be scrapped or whether it's going to be sent in for another long-term upgrade and repair. The Soviet Union required state of ships to go around the world. Russia, for its own self-image, requires state of ships to send around the world. Their aircraft carrier Kuznetsov should not be being kept going like it is. Believe it or not, the nuclear cruisers are in probably the best condition of the lot, along with Varag. Why? Fortune, in terms of the officers who've been in charge of them. In the case of the nuclear cruisers, because they are nuclear powered, they have had slightly more attention, and they have slightly more organisations watching their maintenance and watching their systems because of that nuclear power, because of the risk it perceives, and because of the value of them and the status of them. Poor Moscow didn't have any of those benefits, and as such, we've seen what she suffered. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. This is a lot longer than 20 minutes. I will add probably an advert in the middle then. Because if I don't, YouTube doesn't like promoting videos if they don't have enough adverts in them. I can get away with a 20-minute video not having an advert in the middle of it, and it's still, the algorithm still seems to promote it, still gets roughly the same circulation. However, if I put out a longer video without one, because I don't have enough reach to get me started already, in terms of I don't have enough subscribers, then the video just seems to plummet. And anyway, thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and take care.